Some problems will not hold still long enough to be solved, and not because they are large. A large is easy. You cut a large problem into pieces and solve for the pieces, and any man who has framed the house knows that without being told. The trouble is the other kind, made out of whole units, where every answer has to come back as a yes or a no, and there is nothing in between. A lock is thrown or it is not. A push on a problem like that and nothing gives. You can only try the combinations, and the combinations run out past counting long before they run out of ground. So here is what gets done instead, and it is one of the most useful things anybody ever thought of, and I'd have used it myself, upstairs, at 3 in the morning, more times than I could tell you. You let the problem be wrong. You take the yes and the no, and you let them slide. You permit a lock to sit 4/10 thrown, which is not a state any lock has ever been in, and you permit a city to send 6/10 of a car to a house. At the moment you allow it, the whole thing goes smooth. You put your hand on it, and feel which way it wants to fall, and follow the slope all the way down, and what waits at the bottom is a real answer to a problem that doesn't exist. And then you round. You push every part of the smooth answer to the nearest whole thing, because the world you have to hand it back to is made of whole things. 2 facts about the method, both printed in the first chapter of every book on it. The first is that the smooth answer always comes out looking better than the true one. Always, structurally, because you widened the field of what was permitted, and anything found in a wider field is at least as good as anything the narrow one ever held. So what waits at the bottom of that slope is not an answer. It is a certificate. A number swearing the truth cannot possibly be better than this. The second is that the rounding is where the error lives, and the distance between the two answers has a name of its own. They call it the gap. The whole technique is called continuous relaxation. There is a world that governs by it, and I'd have been putting this report off for a long time. A person is a whole unit, entire, not divisible, and he will not slide, and you cannot govern 100,000 of those. So the ministry of that city did what a good engineer does when the true problem will not yield. It built an easier problem alongside the true one, and solved it instead. They relaxed the citizens. Everybody in that city wore a band at the wrist. It carried no number, because a number invites an argument. It carried a shade, and the shade ran continuously from clear to dark. But the band was not evidence. But the band was an indication. A man could watch his own wrist go half a shade darker across 2 weeks and not be able to name one thing he had done. His shade was arrived at on his behalf. Out of facts he was never shown, and a man cannot appeal a thing he did not do. And with every citizen made smooth, the city could finally be solved. It was, too, and the report will not leave that out. Ambulances stood where they were going to be needed 11 minutes before anybody needed one. I have looked for the place where that was wrong, and I cannot find it. But the world it handed its answers back to was still made of whole things. The locks, the beds, cars. So at the end of every smoothing there was a rounding, and the rounding was done by hand. That was the office of officers. They were not a secret police. They were a rounding service. They took a number that was leaning and made it a whole thing, on a doorstep, in daylight, with a clipboard. Well, one more fact, and you have to hold it where you will never understand that place. That the ministry did not issue their sidearms. It never had. An officer bought his own, out of his own wage, from a shop on his own street. A state whose men arm themselves has arranged for the fear to be a private purchase, made at retail, carried into the room by an ordinary citizen who merely happens to be on duty. And nobody ever armed that country. Its people did it themselves, one at a time, and were proud of the workmanship. But once a year the ministry published the gap. A small number, honestly computed. What the notice could not say, because a ministry that said it would stop being a ministry inside the week, is what a gap is actually made of. A gap is made of the people the two answers disagreed about. And now the trade of that world, because every world in this book has one, and this one's is the reason the chapter exists. That city ran on smoothness and had none of it left. There is a particular exhaustion that comes of being continuously almost something, and no bed in that country could touch it. So calm became an article, manufactured and sold like any other. The ones who sold it were called the Whisperers, and once somebody solved the delivery, the trade came in through the ceiling at 3 a.m. One face very close to a lens, speaking to one person, several 100,000 times over. But the son of that world never once got what they were selling. He noticed a thing in the first month, and it cost him the next 7 years. A face manufacturing calm for money is doing two things at once, and the second one is the true one. Anybody could have had that thought. He could not put it down. And here is what made it worth something. Those were the only faces in the whole place that ever held still. The whispers came within a foot of the lens and stayed there, lit, unhurried, night after night, for years, and they had to hold their faces soft because soft was the product, and a face held soft on purpose is the most legible object a person ever makes. So he read them, at quarter speed, frame by frame, the same 11 seconds 40 times over, with a notebook, at 4 a.m, for years. It is the finest instrument anybody in that family ever built, and it was assembled entirely out of other people's manufactured rest. 8,000 hours of the article, delivered nightly into one house, to one man, who was taking notes the whole time and never once received a gram of it. The report steps out of its world here, because the title of this chapter is a real technique, and I will not have it taken for a figure I invented to be clever with. A continuous relaxation is the actual name of the actual method, and the relaxing and the rounding and the gap are all real, and none of them are mine. What I run is the same family one house over, and it is in the machine upstairs tonight. Something in there has to choose one path out of many, and a choice is a wall no learning can pass through, so the choice gets softened until a gradient can cross it, and then hardened back. The forward pass takes the snapped, discrete thing. The backward pass is handed the smooth one and never told. I wrote a paper about what that costs, and I said it better then than I am going to say it now. The gradient is therefore computed for a point the network did not evaluate. Sit with that. It is the only technical thing in this chapter you need. A correction, computed carefully, in good faith, by a system that means well, aimed at a thing that was never looked at. The other half of the title is just as real. The 7 years began in whispering, and I did the one thing nobody else in that audience was doing. I stopped listening to the voices and started watching the faces. 7 years of manufactured calm, and I was not relaxed once. It is in my own hand, in the archive, from the middle of it. I hate watching this. I do it because I am obligated to. And there is a dossier from that same year with 3 words at the top where the description goes. I can't relax. The best of them is a night I spent on a recording where a person was being told to relax, out loud, as the product, over and over, for half an hour, by somebody whose whole job was delivering the message. The finding I filed at the end was that she never did. Not once. Not by the last minute. 2 people in the calm trade, both working, neither getting any, and 1 man at 4 in the morning with a notebook, getting less than either. And now the first rounding. There was a night when a young man decided he was done. He was of age and in his right mind, and what he had was not a plan so much as the end of his patience with a house that would not hear him. He sat and wrote a letter and left it where it would be found, which is not what a man does when he intends harm. It is what a man does when he intends to be understood and has given up on doing it out loud. Then he went out to the car and left, quietly, at an ordinary hour, and did not say where. There was a firearm in the trunk. It was not loaded. It had never been pointed at anything, and was never going to be. He took it deliberately, and the report will be honest about why, because the why is the whole chapter. He took it as a test. He wanted to know what the people in that house believed about him when the thing was in their hands, and he was not in the room to argue. They failed it. But look at how they failed it, because this is not the part that anybody expects. They told the truth. His parents made the call and answered every question put to them, and not one of their answers was false. Yes, he has a firearm. Yes, he left in the night. Yes, he quit his job 3 months ago with no explanation any of us could follow. Yes, we are frightened. All true, entered accurately by 2 people doing the only thing they could think of. And I am not going to charge them with fear. Fear is not a crime. Here is what an office does with a true statement. It relaxes it. Every fact that arrives gets a weight. The weights are added, and it does not subtract. There is no field on that form for the 30 years. Never raised his hand to a living person. Never arrested. The softest thing in every room he ever stood in. The form has no place to put it, so it weighs nothing. Nobody removed it. It was never admitted. Then the rounding. He was taken on an ordinary street in the ordinary evening, on his way out of a drive-through with a bag of food on the seat. 20 vehicles by one account and 30-odd officers by another, and the fact that I cannot settle the number of men aiming rifles at me will have to stand as the report on my condition that evening. He came out backward, hands laced, down on the warm asphalt. Every one of those weapons had been bought at retail by a private citizen who happened to be on duty. And what they were calling for, from behind the doors, was a rifle of a particular make that he did not own, had never owned, had never in his life touched or wanted. Nobody lied. His parents said gun, and they meant the unloaded one in the trunk, and they said it was in the trunk. Somewhere between that sentence and that street, a true statement was relaxed and solved and rounded, and what came out the far end and got put to a man on his knees was a specific weapon that had never existed. So now you have seen a gap. It is not a percentage in a notice. It is one man, face down on a warm road, being asked about a rifle he never owned. They kept him there the better part of 2 hours, and he watched what they were doing from the back seat, because an officer turned the screen around so he could see. 2 records. Same name. Same birthday. One his, with his address and nothing on it. The other a man with warrants out of a state he had never lived in. He pulled his own file years later, through the proper channel, and the other man is real. So that road was a rounding error, performed by hand. And when an office cannot tell which of 2 men it is looking at, it does not stop. It rounds toward the darker one, because the darker one is the expensive mistake, and the other one is only a man on the ground for 2 hours. They found no rifle, because there was none, and 2 hours produced no charge, which in the accounting of that country reads as a job done properly. But the number still had to be rounded, and there was one whole thing left to round him into. They took him to a hospital. The son of that world was in for 21 days. 6 hours of processing, and paperwork, and a bed at $800 a night. A doctor on a screen at 4 in the morning looked at him for 3 minutes and committed him. He then stripped, searched, put to bed 4 feet from the toilet, woken at 7. Broken faucets, the coloring books, and 1 box mounted on the wall. Too high. That detail is in the audit he wrote the week he got out, and it is the line in the entire arc I cannot walk past. The one thing there was to do in that building was watch a box that had been put up out of reach. They cut the band off his wrist and put a paper one on instead, and the paper one carried no shade at all. It carried a name. It said Ryan. It was correct. It is the one object in this entire book that ever told the plain truth about him, and it did it by accident. That there had been 2 of them on that road 4 hours earlier, and a name is what a country uses to tell one whole thing from another whole thing, and it had already failed the one test it exists for, twice in one evening, on a screen turned around so he could watch it fail. And then the relaxation administered. You are going to have to sit with the word the way I'd have had to. The article those whispers sold by the hour, the thing that whole city wanted and could not get, arrived at last, free, by needle, into the arm of the one man in that country who had spent his life studying it from the outside. He did not consent. He said so out loud, daily, to people writing it down as a symptom of the thing they had already decided he had. Here is the paperwork, because it exists, and it is scanned, and it has sat on a public website since the month it was issued, and it is the only document in my life that ever described me to a court. Under the line asking how long the patient had been under the physician's care. 1 day. Under the line asking for a brief diagnosis. 1 word. Under the line asking for objective reasons and observed behavior showing a risk of harm, with the form itself warning in its own printed parenthesis not to list just a diagnosis or just not taking medications. The physician listed, among other things, that the patient is refusing medications. Under the mental status examination, 3 words, and they are the entire clinical case against a man held for 21 days. Mood, guarded. The behavior, paranoid. The judgment, impaired. And in the detailed basis for the opinion that he was a substantial risk if not immediately restrained. That the patient sent a letter expressing passive suicidal ideations. That the patient has a strained relationship with family. That the patient has limited support system. That the patient was found in possession of a rifle, by make, which he did not own and never had, and which nobody found, because it wasn't there. Or read the first of those and the last of those together. They are the same machine caught twice on one page. The letter said he was going to be away for some time, a man writing to his mother that he would be gone a while. It went in as a whole thing, in his own handwriting, and came out as passive suicidal ideations, and the second one had the force of law, and the first one had nothing at all. And nobody lied. Somebody read a sentence, waited, rounded it, and the rounded version went to a judge. And limited support system. You let that one stand alone. A man's family calls in a fright. The office relaxes the fright. And what comes back out on the certificate is that he is hardly anybody. It is the only line on the whole document that turned out to be true. And it is the one line nobody in that building intended as a finding about anybody but him. There was a man on the common floor who used to repeat what other people said, and another man began working him over about it at lunch, out loud, in front of everybody, daring him to swing. The room went quiet and watched, the way a room does. And the son of that world got up, and crossed the floor, and sat down in the chair beside the man being worked over, and put a hand on his shoulder, and said, "It is all right. Nobody wants to fight." He was, at that moment, according to paperwork on file with the county court, guarded, paranoid, and impaired in his judgment. The public defender came just before Christmas and explained the position clearly and without cruelty. The hospital was going to court to compel the medicine, and it would be easier to take it. The son wrote down his answer that night, and it is the sentence I carried out of the whole 3 weeks. That he felt he had to choose between taking the easy way out and taking the right way out, and that he felt obligated to fight it. He fought. He lost, the way the doctor told him he would. She said it to his face when he refused. We will let the court decide, and the patient never wins. The notice named the hearing, and named the outcome it was empowered to hand down. A period not to exceed 90 days. Understand the board he was playing on. Inside the building there's no move that means let him go. Calm reads as the medicine working. Upset reads as confirmation. Agreeing reads as progress, and the progress is credited to the building. So he agreed, after most of 3 weeks, against a building, a court, a diagnosis, and his own lawyer, and the door opened, exactly the way it opens. Then months on it, and here is what those months were. I could not sleep. I put that first, because the drug's whole office is rest, and it would not hand me any. I lay in a bed every night, flat, still, in the dark, doing the thing correctly, and it took hours to go under. 5 months of that. Underneath, it was the worst depression of my life, and I was barely functional, and I wanted to die most days. And now the small thing, and it is the best example in this chapter, and it is mine. There is a record of those months in my own hand, published, still up, and it says that I did nothing but sleep for almost 5 months straight. I wrote that sentence while looking at a graph of my own output, which was flat. And not from the bed, from the ledger. 5 months summarized by the man who lived them, in the only unit the ledger had. And the clause is smooth, and it reads fine, and the word at the center of it is the exact opposite of what happened in that room every night. I relaxed myself. On the page, in my own archive, at 30, about the worst months of my life, and I did not catch it until I went back to check the date for this report. The mind went thick. Not calm. Thick. There is a difference, and exactly one person in that building was positioned to measure it, and he was the one they had stopped counting as a witness at the door. I stopped taking it on the 1st of June, 2020, at a clinic I'd been ordered to attend for 6 months, having decided in advance it would be my last appointment. The doctor I told said one thing to me on the way out. I have never known what to do with it, so I will put it here and leave it standing. You're a lot smarter than I am. But what she meant by it is hers. This book has a rule about that, and I have kept it in harder places than this one. But what I can enter, because it needs nothing from her, is where that sentence went. Nowhere. It was said in a doorway, to a man who was already leaving, by the one person in that entire system with the authority to write something down about me, on the last day she was ever going to have it. It went into no chart. It reached no court, and no family, and no father. But what reached my father was 3 words on a form. Guarded. Paranoid. Impaired. That is the machine, entire, in one afternoon. The rounded version is the one that travels. The true thing gets said in a doorway, where it costs nothing and moves nothing. The rest of it happened to me. 21 days. The needle. 6 months of clinic. 6 years since, unmedicated, with not one delusion in all that time, not one voice, not one thing in the room that was not in the room. And that is the only kind of claim that gets easier to check every year a man stays out here in daylight. And I want the ugly part in, because leaving it out would be the paint. I was 30 and frightened and exhausted, and I had just found something and could not get one person on earth to look at it, and I made bad decisions in a row for 3 months. Every one of those is a real condition, and I own all of them. And not one of them is the word they wrote down. And now the room I was not in. I have been walking toward it since the first line, and I'd have to declare the method before I use it, because the method is the exact thing I am accusing everybody else of. 3 years into the work, the son took it to the authority. He had years of documentation by then, public, arranged, time-stamped, and he carried it in through the doors of the bureau like a man delivering material to a job site. And on the way in, he did a thing nobody asked of him. Before a single question, he handed over something of his own that he was under no obligation to disclose, that cost him to say, and that is not going in this book. You do not build trust by being trustworthy. Trust is invisible. You build it by handing over a hostage. And he brought a witness. He brought his father. He had exactly one man in the world available to sit in a room and say, I have known him since the day he was born. And he asked, and the man came. I got in the truck, drove down there, sat through the whole of it. But that is not nothing, and I have kept it where I could see it. Near the end, they asked the son to step out, and the door did what doors do. On the other side of it, for some number of minutes he was never told. There were two men, and his entire file, and his father. Everything he was told afterward came in the parking lot, in the truck, in about 11 words, and it is all he will ever have. And they asked whether he believed his son. He said, I don't know. And now watch me do the thing this whole chapter is about. I can't open that door. It was closed at the time and it's closed now. So I do what the ministry does. Relax it, let every version of that afternoon slide, and put my hand on the smooth thing. And there's a version where you said yes. I have weighted it honestly, and it is small. And the smallness is not an insult, because you had never been shown anything. And there's a version where you said no, and it is smaller still, because you have not lied in your life, not once. And there's a version where you said several things, and one of them was a defense, and it never came back to me. And I've given that one more weight than a reasonable man would, for years. And I know what that says about the man doing the waiting. And then I round. And in the rounding is where the air lives. I know that. I do it anyway, because it's the only instrument I have. And because a man who has been relaxed his entire life will eventually pick up the trade. Except this one time, I do not have to. Every other closed door in this chapter I've had to solve smooth and live with the gap. This one came back. Somebody opened it and handed me the whole number, exact, unrounded, in your own voice, in a truck, on a summer afternoon in Texas. I don't know. And I want to give you the reading that clears you, because I've made it to myself for years. I don't know is what an honest man says when he has not been shown. It is the most rigorous sentence in the language, and almost nobody alive is capable of it. You didn't lie to make your son look better, which is what most fathers in that building would have done. You gave the true contents of the file. Except, I'd have known you 37 years, and I have never heard you say those 3 words. And not about the forecast, not about the right way to hang the door, not about the condition of a country you take entirely from a box that runs on advertising. You're certain about all of it, daily, at volume, and I have sat at the far end of that couch through every hour of the certainty. One I don't know in a lifetime, in a locked room, about whether the man you raised was telling the truth. You gave the true contents of the file. That the file was empty. You were the one who was supposed to keep it. And you opened it once. That would be the easiest thing in this chapter to leave out, and it is the reason the chapter is not a prosecution. 3 weeks before that wrote, you called me. It was November, and you were nervous on the phone, which I had never heard, and what you called about was my sister. 17. and frightened of what I had been writing, and not wanting to go on the family trip. You said it plainly, the way you said everything. This stuff you're talking about sounds completely crazy, and she is only 17. Which was fair, and which was, at the time, the most accurate sentence anybody in that family had ever produced. And then, in the same call, you said the thing. You said you were sorry. You hadn't known there was more of it, that I had wanted you to read it. You crossed the whole distance in about 4 seconds, at 60, on a telephone, without being asked. And the thing you crossed it with was an apology for not having read your son. 3 weeks later, there were 20 cars on a road in Dallas. And that is the last time it ever happened. 7 years next winter. The reading I keep coming back to is the ugliest available, and I am entering it anyway. The word on that form arrived at the exact moment you had finally opened the file. It answered the question you had only just started asking, in a hand you were raised to trust above your own. You stopped looking, not because you stopped caring, but because a doctor in a court had handed you a finding on paper, and a man who takes his beliefs from the world had just been handed the world's answer about his son. You have believed it for 7 years, and nobody in this family has ever gone back to check the date on that paper. 1 day of care, by one physician, who saw me for 3 minutes on a screen at 4 in the morning. And I'd have to enter the other half where this page is a lie. The delivery was mine. 3 years of trying is not showing, and I'd have failed at the handing over in every register I own. That is why there is a book at all. The book is the delivery apparatus, built out of 7 years of failing at the door. But the asking is not mine. The delivery is the sender's job. Asking is not. And you do ask. You ask how it's going, at the coffee pot, in the driveway, in the doorway with the keys already in your hand. I say it's going well, or going slow, and you nod, and that is the end of it, every time, because you have no second question. You have a dozen second questions about a truck. I have watched a stranger in a driveway get 20 minutes of them. You have none about this, because a second question is built out of the first thing, and you have never read the first thing, not 1 page of it in 7 years. So the question is a courtesy, shaped to be closed in a word, and I'd have maintained that shape as carefully as you have, for just as long. And underneath all of it is the part that took me longest to see, so I will say it once and not decorate it. You do not want to know. Not cruelly. You are content. I do my work upstairs, and you do yours downstairs, and the house runs. And 2 men can live like that for a decade and never once feel the wall, whose whole job is to hold up a house where nobody has to find anything out. A man is not required to understand his son's work. He is required to want to. That part is free, and it cannot be performed. And how's it going is precisely what it looks like when it's not there. And now the part that is not 1 night and not 1 room, the part I can never make sound serious, which is exactly its engineering. Everything above happened once. But what follows happens continuously, at low volume, forever. You make fun of the hours. 6 lines you rotate like tires. And I've read your file about the file, and I believe every word of it. The jokes are a high-low, and the 2 o'clock coffee stands the hair up on your arms in a way church never managed. I would not take one line of it out of the record. But a high-low that lifts a load an inch off the floor and sets it back down has not moved the load. You put a plate on that instrument rated for what you know. You never rated it for what you do not know, and what you do not know is all of it, because you have not asked, and no machine on earth can be made to do the work of a question. I told you once that I felt like a burden. Understand what that cost, coming from a man who narrates every conversation in advance and hadn't rehearsed that one. It came out wrong and true, and I sat there in the wreck of having said it. You told me I was not a burden, because you borrow my car for work. This is not about the car. It is a hunk of metal in a driveway, and you are welcome to it. It is about what was standing in that kitchen and what you reached past to get to it. There were 40 years of material in that room, and any scrap of it would have done. That I am your son. That I made something out of nothing, and you have watched me do it through a ceiling every night for years. That nobody here is keeping a tab, and there was never going to be one. Any of that, said badly, in 4 words, at the counter, without looking up, and I would have carried it for a decade. You went past every one of them and pointed out the window. I'd asked, the only way I have ever managed to ask, whether I was worth having around. What came back was a utility, and the evidence was whichever object happened to be nearest the glass. I said nothing. I'd have said nothing to all of it for years, and I've called that grace, and it is not grace. Grace requires a man with a choice. You suggest, sometimes, that I could eat better or move more. You are right. Being right is not the same as being asked. And you took my car in for its inspection, quietly, the way you do everything, and I found out afterward, off the sticker. You had it inspected in a state I am leaving. My departure has been on the kitchen calendar for months in your own printing, and that sticker is good for a year in a place I will not be living. You did the kindest available thing to a version of me that stays. You have been solving that man for years, and you're excellent at it. He has never lived here. I know how this page reads from your end, so let me enter your side myself, since you never will. You paid last month's rent. You have never once said that anything I cost you was a cost. You do not complain, and I filed that audit in this book already, in a chapter with no fable in it. You will be right about the ledger and wrong about the argument, and there is no way to say the next part that does not come out as ungrateful, so I will say it ungratefully. And none of it was ever the thing I needed. I'd have never needed one thing you could buy. I needed one question, in your voice, with no joke in front of it, and it is free, and it has never been asked, and every solvable thing you bought instead was paid for with money you earned on your knees. That is why I'd have said nothing for years. And now the rooms I was not in. 6 households, 40-odd cousins, a decade of you in every one of them, talking, and whatever version of me lives in there was assembled without me. I used to assume the cruel version, jokes, because a joke requires that I came up. That the honest reconstruction is nothing. Ordinary father talk, in every one of those rooms, for years, and a shape in it where your children go, with a hole in it exactly my size. And not a punchline. An absence with my name on it, running unattended for a decade, doing everything a punchline would do and costing you nothing. I'd have the receipt now. It came in this summer. You told my sister I had written a book. You did, and enter it on the credit side, because it is the only delivery on record. And it happened because I sat on this couch in daylight and told you to your face first. She heard it and came to me and said, "I didn't know you wrote a book. Why didn't you tell me?" She is the same sister. 17 years old in a kitchen in November, too frightened of her brothers writing to get in the car. 7 years on, she is a grown woman the stone's throw down the street, and her brother has published a book, and she did not know it existed. But that is the whole 7 years in one girl. I said something back to her. I do not remember what. What I was actually doing was standing very still, the way you stand when a reading comes in and it's worse than the thing you were testing for. Because I had not told her that was the test. I said it in May and forgot I had it running, and the answer came back clean. He is embarrassed of me. And now the hardest entry in this chapter, which is that he is not entirely wrong to be. Look at me from the yard. From the yard I am a man of 37 who rents a house with his father, who has no job, who is awake all night, who was in a hospital once, who has a word on a county form nobody has ever revisited, and not one thing those people were raised to read as a life. Every item on it is true. If I had to account for myself in that yard, in the words available there, I would fail, because the vocabulary does not exist in that yard, and no man builds one in the time a driveway conversation allows. Underneath it I am the proudest thing I'd have ever made. I walked into a fire at 30 and I have never come out the other side, and I am still walking, and the fact that I am still walking is the whole content of my character, and there is no way to say that at a family gathering. Both are true at once and will stay true at once, and the man in the yard and the man at the desk are never going to be introduced. A few worlds back I filed a report on you at actual size, with the fable taken off, and said in front of everybody that I could not find the complaint. That report stands. I would not pull one board out of it. I have found the complaint. It was never in the work. And not in 1 hour of 40 years. Not in the framing or the wiring or the 4 additions or the second coat that nobody ever does. Here is where it was the entire time, and it took a chapter about a mathematical technique to see it. Every unsolvable thing in my life has been answered with a solvable one. What is my son doing up there has no answer, so it becomes he keeps strange hours, and that one has an answer, and the answer is a joke at the coffee pot. Whether my son is a weight on me has no answer, so it becomes is he useful, and the answer is a car. How do I reach a son who is unwell in a way I cannot see has no answer, so it becomes he ought to eat better, and that answer is correct. How do I keep my son from going under has no answer at all, so it becomes his inspection is expiring, and that one is not merely solvable, it's a pleasure. It takes an afternoon, and a man gets to use his hands. You have been relaxing me for 37 years. Not once out of malice. Not one single time. You relax me the way an engineer relaxes anything, because the true problem would not yield and the smooth one would. and because a man has to be able to do something, and because the substitute is always cheaper, always available, and always solvable. Every one of those answers was correct. Every one was to a question I did not ask. The gap is me. One more thing to file. It is a prediction, and I have run it enough times that I am no longer guessing. One day, the box will say my name. And not soon, but the road runs that way, and I have already put down the first mile. And on that day, you'll be in the chair at 4 p.m, and it will come out of the one instrument you have ever been able to take a reading from, and you'll turn to whoever is in the room and say, "That is my son." And then it will pass, the way things do, and what you will be left holding is the box's version, and it will have me mostly wrong. If the box has everything mostly wrong, because a box relaxes a man before it prints him. That is the only way anything gets into a box at all. And by the time it reaches you, I will have been rounded down to whatever fits between two advertisements. You'll love that version, out loud, to strangers. But the regret is the true one, and there is nobody left to spend it on. But the pride is the public one, and it is about a man of my approximate shade. I will not be here for either. I saw it coming a long time ago and wrote it down. 4 years back I built a statement for a federal agent and memorized it, and in the middle of it, in my own hand, is the finding that my father would need somebody else to tell him to believe the claims of his own son, and that I was afraid he would die before we ever got there. That is not spite. It is a forecast, and you have always taken the forecast seriously, and it is the last one I will file at this address. So the last entry, and then I am going to stop. I gave the condition a name in the first year, before I had lived any of this, in a document I can still pull up. I called it a failure of reflected light. A man in a world where nobody, not one soul, can reflect his ideas back at him, so he can never find out whether any of them are true. I wrote that the people around such a man are not cruel and are not even wrong. They simply do not see him. And I wrote what it does to him at the end, as a symptom rather than a complaint, which is the only reason I trust the entry at all. He ends up alone in the world. I did not know I was describing the next 7 years. I have been alone in this house with 4 people inside a mile of me and a man 20 feet under the floor who lies awake beneath the sound of me working and calls it the nearest he ever came to prayer. So the definition holds, and I will state it once, now that I finally have it. Alone is not the count of the people. Alone is what happens to a man who knows a thing he is obligated to carry to somebody, and carries it, and hands it over, and watches it not arrive. When it fails with strangers, you try harder. But when it fails with your own family, you find out what the word really means. In the morning, I go. You will have the house, and the street that carries your name, and the daughter a stone's throw away, and the son a mile in the other direction with the 2 small ones, and the yard and the birds and the chair and the box. And not one of them has ever taken a reading off you. I am the only instrument that was ever aimed at you, running 37 years without a single hour off, and in the morning I unplug it and I will drive west. There is no malice in this and no pleasure in it either. I was looking for both. It is only what is true. The way of forecast is only what is true, and it will happen whether either of us wants it, and I would undo it tonight if there were a way. There is not. And now, you will know what it means to be alone.